Hello and welcome to Journey to Fatherhood podcast. It's your host here, Chinadum. And guess what? It's episode 50. This is the 50th episode of Journey to Fatherhood. And the reason why I'm so happy about this is because every single episode has taught me something more. First of all, I want to begin by saying thank you to everyone that's been listening, whether you just found that recently by a video on YouTube or podcast on any of the platforms that we're on. I just want to begin by saying thank you for riding with me, thank you for staying with me, thank you for learning, and thank you for choosing growth. The reason why I started this podcast in April 2020 was because I felt there was so much conversation that weren't being had, especially with men. Again, like I said in the very first episode, if you haven't watched it, make sure you go check it out. I felt that a lot of times when in life everyone has different stages. When I say that, it means that as a boy, you learn to do things that other boys do. As a young teen, you try to become a better version of you or try to find your identity. As a man, you're expected to know everything. There is often this expectation as a man that you should know everything, and by fatherhood, you should already know how to be a father, even if no one ever taught you. So when I saw this and I experienced this and I'm going through this at the time, I started feeling to myself that it's surely a conversation we need to have more of. The journey to fatherhood. This is where the Journey to Fatherhood podcast was birthed, where I wanted to kind of, on my journey to fatherhood, have people that I speak to, have conversations where people understand that these are topics that we need to cover. Things like mental health, things like being able to forgive and heal, things like being able to create wealth, generational wealth, being able to just own your identity, and so much more. And all through it, one thing I found out? Nothing is as obvious as we think it is. It isn't always obvious. What I mean by that is that over the conversations I've been having, when you're just on your own and you're just thinking about so many things, and so many things have become a normality to you, like you just have those conversations with yourself. For example, the importance of mental health. Let me just talk about that. The importance of mental health, the importance of taking a break. For any person that's into that, they'll think it's a normal conversation to have. Like, that's obvious. Like, you think to yourself, making sure you take a break, it's obvious. It's so obvious. You need to take a break so that you can rest up and be able to go on. But you could go and speak to someone else and realize for them it's not that obvious. Maybe for them they view resting as a sign of laziness. Maybe they view resting as a sign of weakness. Maybe they view resting as giving up. So you got to realize that some of the conversations that you have, some of the things that you believe that should be obvious to people isn't always obvious. And it's interesting, when I've had conversations on the podcast with guests, I then get people message me privately and share their thoughts on what I talked about, on what the conversation was about. And some of them tell me, I've never thought about it this way, or this has really helped me, or I needed this. And things comments like that or messages like that make me realize that, wow, maybe it isn't that obvious. Maybe it isn't obvious for a guy to feel that it's okay to cry. Now, I know people have their own thoughts about this and say, people that are very toxic in their mindset will probably say, men don't cry. But let me challenge you and tell you this. When you fall down and you hurt your knee, do you feel pain? When you have those emotions, and I know that physical pain is different from emotional pain, but the reason I'm saying this is men go through pain. So if you go through pain, surely the aim is to address that pain. Because if you don't address the pain, it will keep on going longer and longer. If it's not catered to, it could travel everywhere else. The emotional pain from one area of your life, let's say emotional pain from your father abandoning you growing up, or emotional pain from having a relationship ended. Those things, if you don't deal with it, if you don't harness the ability to just address it, if you don't take the time to say, okay, this has happened, come to realization with what's happened, and put some things in place where you let go or you heal, and let go and heal. If you don't do those things, that same frustration and anger and pain from that relationship could then travel over to your family relationships, the way you interact with your loved ones. It could even affect your career in the sense that you then lose motivation, you don't know what's happening, you just aren't able to put yourself together. See how it all connects. But that again isn't always obvious to people. So there's nothing wrong with speaking about topics that to many people may not seem obvious, but the importance of it all is that we talk about these things. Today's episode, I just wanted to talk to you about the importance of the obvious. The importance of the obvious. It's so important that we feel okay to talk about these things, because there are certain topics I've talked on a podcast that initially I was thinking to myself, well, this is so obvious. This is so cliche. Like anyone and everyone knows this. But the truth is sometimes we are in our heads thinking everyone else is also. The things that we think are normal are not so normal to people. The idea that guys can get together and support each other and encourage each other, for some people it's not normal because they haven't experienced it, or they've lived a life where they saw the opposite of it, so they never thought it was possible. The idea that men can come on a podcast and talk about times where they felt down, times where they felt they're very low, and that for many people isn't normal. The fact that people need to let go, people need to release those anger, the fact that people need to forgive past experiences, the fact that people have childhood traumas that they're dealing with, that for many people doesn't seem obvious. So the next time you think, oh well, this is so obvious, no one would ever, no, everyone should know this, everyone must know this, so what's the point of talking about it? You'd be surprised, just one person that heard that could have their whole direction changed because they heard it. And I'm not saying this to big yourself up or to big myself up. The reason I'm saying it is to encourage you to talk about those very things. To all the guys that listen to this, I'm telling you right now, the things that you think are obvious, for example, the fact that you think it's obvious that your family should be able to understand how you're feeling or should be able to notice what you're going through. Sometimes it isn't that obvious. Sometimes you need to actually tell them, or raise your hand and say, guys, I need some help. Or tell your friends or your male friends, guys, I need to talk to you guys. A lot of times we fail to grow or fail to go forward in life because we make so many assumptions. The assumption that, well, they should know how I feel. Sometimes they don't always know. Sometimes you need to tell them how you feel. I was on Instagram a while ago. I believe it was Instagram. No, it was on TikTok. I was on TikTok a while ago. And what I came across was a video where it was just no audio, no speaking audio. It was just instrumental in the background. And it was two guys, a gentleman at a party, and I think he was right next to his dad. And the caption, or what was written, was me telling my dad that I needed his love growing up. And then the following text said, my dad telling me that he never knew how to express that because he never received that. So you imagine, I think it was a wedding or a party. Yeah, it was a party. And it got me thinking to myself, how often do we fail, or how often do we get hurt because we don't communicate, because we think it's obvious? It isn't always obvious to many people. That is why we need to communicate. Communication is so key. And if you've been following my journey on this podcast, if you've been following my journey to fatherhood, you hear that, you notice that a lot of the conversations, one word that always comes up is communication. It is so key to be able to communicate effectively. And many people, because of, or as a result of lack of communication, they end up feeling rejected, they end up feeling ignored, they end up feeling not valued. Because they think it should be obvious. Surely you should know that I'm going through this. Surely you should know that I need this help. And on top of that, again, talking about the obvious, I decided to take to TikTok. I've started an account, or I restarted an account where I post 3 to 4 pieces of content, short clips a day. Same handle as my Instagram handle at chinedum_1naya. That's on TikTok. You can find me there. 3 to 4 clips every day. And what did I find out? The very obvious things in having people send me messages and say, bro, I really needed this. One of the very interesting ones was when I made a short clip about body image for guys. Yeah, body image for guys is an issue. But you know, people don't really think about it because it's not obvious to them. And I had a very interesting comment because one of the clips I made during that day was about hairline. And if you guys know, it's one of those things where so many men have their confidence brought down when they start finding out their hairline's receding. It's an important thing that people don't really talk about much, but it's a big deal for guys. For many, it affects their confidence, it affects the way they view themselves or their assumptions of what people view them as. So when I did this clip, I had a young man, because I wasn't able to really, he didn't have anything on his personal page, I wasn't able to identify his age or where he was coming from, but he made a comment and said that he really needed it. He really needed it to remind him that his hairline isn't him. His hairline is a part of his body. It doesn't identify who he is. His hairline doesn't make up who he should be. And we went on TikTok as well. I created another video on the back of that where he asked me, okay, so how do I change my mindset? But the truth, before I even go any further, prior to that, I would have thought it's obvious. Of course, your hairline, whether you have a lot of hair or you don't, that doesn't define you. That for many people would have seemed so obvious. And at that point, it felt obvious to me. But I challenged myself to get across those very messages I thought was obvious. Because the truth about it is, like I said, it isn't always obvious. So I'm asking you today, what are those things that you've made the idea or you believe that are obvious, but in reality, they're not that obvious to many people? Journey to Fatherhood isn't just about me talking about, okay, what I want to achieve or my past. It's also about me coming to realize that the very thing that I think are obvious actually need to be talked about more. The fact that it's okay to go up to your brother or to your male friend and tell them, listen, how are you truly doing? To have a conversation with them and challenge them to open up. That may seem obvious, but it's not. So I do it. The fact that it's okay to understand that some of the behaviors and the fears and the insecurities you have are as a result of childhood traumas that need to be dealt with. For many people, that isn't obvious, but we have to start talking about that. Because the idea is, of course, everything connects. Yeah, the way you were brought up, growing up, has something to do with the way you are now. Sounds obvious, but it's not always obvious. It's not always obvious. So let's change our mindset from making assumptions that, of course, you should know this, to, okay, let's talk about this, whether you know it or you don't know it. That is how we truly grow. And as men, I really want to encourage you, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, follow the journey and take some time to have some introspective look at yourself. What are the things that I've made assumptions that are obvious but truly aren't? And then what do I do about that? It's so important. So in keeping with the topic, it's not always obvious. I want to challenge you to do 3 things that you believe are obvious. The 3 things goes across the boards. If you're a child or a young boy under the age of 18, to be honest, forget the age. 3 things you should do today that may seem obvious, but I need you to still do. If your father is still around, if you have a father that's still around, reach out to him and say, Dad, I love you. And I know initially hearing that you may say, why am I that's so random? But listen, sometimes the obvious things need to be reminded. If you have your father, if you're fortunate to still have your father around and you know where your father is, send him a call, give them a call, not even a message, because a message can go just anywhere. Give them a call or see them in person and tell them that you love them. If you're a father, do the same to your kids. Tell them that you love them. And I know you probably think, oh, well, they know I love them, or he knows I love him. But just tell them. Let them know, because that very obvious, that thing that seems so obvious to you needs to be reminded. Because sometimes you'd be surprised how many people that don't feel loved, even though they have people that love them around them. It's obvious, but trust me, we need to talk about it more. So again, one of the things you're going to do is, if you're a father, go and find your kids and tell them that you love them. Like, tell them that you love them. Sit them down, however you want to say it. Tell them that you love them. Remind them that you love them. If you're a child and you've got a father, you're fortunate to have your father around, and just your family members, go tell them that you love them. Even that goes as far as going as your friends, your male friends, just go and tell your male friends that, bro, you know I love you. I don't know, anyhow you want to say it, but make sure you say you love them. It's important that we have these conversations, because the very obvious things are the same things, because they're not being addressed, are the things that cause us to miss out on so much. So go tell someone you love them. Go tell your brother, go tell your father, go tell your child, go tell your son that you love them. It's important. Secondly, the second obvious thing that you need to come to terms with is that you've got things to work on. I know it's obvious. Everyone uses the whole "nobody's perfect" as a cop out from doing work or doing personal evaluation on themselves. I know nobody's perfect, but we're human beings and we have the gift of being able to learn and reflect. Once you start reflecting, I want you to take the time. The very same things that are obvious, for example, the whole thing of anger issues, or I say that because I know that it's a reality, but at the same time, some people just always love to say, I've got anger issues. No, you just display anger. It's not that you've got anger issues. There are things within that same sentence that can be addressed, like finding out the root of the anger. What gets you hot-tempered? Why is it now become an issue? So those very obvious things, sit down, reflect, and work on them. If you want, find someone that you trust and you can trust in, and just work on those things. The very obvious things, work on them. Because trust me, the more time you put into talking about the obvious, the more it will then become a reality for many people around you, so that they understand what's obvious to you, and then it becomes clearer to them. So that's the first thing. The first thing is to go tell your loved ones that you love them. Go tell your father that you love them. Fathers, go tell your sons that you love them. Second one is the obvious things. Go look into yourself. The very things that you say are obvious about your character, about your emotions, about your journey. Go and take some time to reflect and work on those things. Speak to the right people about those things. And last but not the least, it's obvious. It's so obvious. It's for you to remember that you are loved. I know it's similar to the first one, but I need you to know that you are loved. Whatever you're going through right now, the whole thing of, I keep saying it, we need to break past these toxic ideas of masculinity. Men do cry. Men do have emotions. Men do struggle. Men do have hard times. We're human beings too. But remember that you are loved. So don't ever question whether because they haven't shown it a certain way or you haven't felt a certain way. Remember that you are loved. No matter what you're going through, irrespective of the past, your childhood traumas or anything like that, there is someone that is always going to be willing to love you. I'm telling you. You just wait long enough and you find. Or you just speak to enough people and you find. Bro, it's important that we get to the point where we have these conversations. It's not always obvious, but when we talk about it more, it becomes clearer. I need you to take the time that you need to work on yourself, to work on those things that seem obvious that haven't been addressed. It's so important. So with that, I want to take you on to the next 50 episodes that will be coming across, because I know we're going to keep growing. So this is cheers. I ain't got a glass of bottle or anything like that. I haven't got a glass to toast to, but this is cheers to the last 50 episodes. And this is cheers to the many more episodes to come, to the many more conversations, to the many more areas of growth to come, to the many more impact, to the influence to come, to the change to come. Listen, it's been a wonderful journey, and this is not a goodbye. It's a I'm gonna see you next week. I love you guys, and as always, thanks for rocking with me. Thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you haven't done so, make sure you follow us on our social media platforms at Journey to Fatherhood on Instagram. Once again, on Instagram, it's at Journey to Fatherhood. Join our Facebook group, which is at Journey to Fatherhood Podcast. The Facebook group is at Journey to Fatherhood Podcast. And yes, we're on TikTok as well, at J2 Fatherhood. J2 Fatherhood. And that's the same handle for Twitter, at J2 Fatherhood. And let me know, would you be interested in a weekly newsletter? Because I've got some stories that I'm receiving from a few men that I'd like to share with you on a weekly basis, where some people, and I want you, it's also open to you, where you can send in your personal stories. You can choose to go anonymous as well, where you send in your personal stories or your personal reflections around the topic of manhood. This can come from a male perspective or from a female perspective. Idea of manhood, fatherhood, all these areas regarding men. Send those in. The place to send it in is write to us and tell us of your interest, of what your story is like. Feel free to send it on our social media pages at Journey to Fatherhood Instagram. Send us a DM of your story, your willingness to share that on a platform. Send that to us at Journey to Fatherhood. That's on Instagram. And if you want to go anonymous, you can send it to us by Gmail. So you can send it to us on Google. That's Gmail at Journey to Fatherhood. The Journey to Fatherhood at gmail.com. That's the Journey to Fatherhood at gmail.com. For the last time, the Journey to Fatherhood at gmail.com. Let's talk about these things. And I would really love to hear your stories and share that with many people that will benefit from it as well. It's Chinedum and it's been great. Let's remember, it's not always obvious, but the more we talk about the obvious, the more it can be clearer to many people. Let's talk about the obvious. Take care. See you next week.